The alarm hadn't stopped wailing for 3 hours. Mira pressed her back against the cold metal wall of Cargo Bay 7, her breath forming small clouds in the recycled air. Outside, through the reinforced viewing port, she could see the wreckage of the Talon's Pride, a Varath warship torn apart by human missiles. The battle had been swift, brutal, and decidedly one-sided. Humanity's first major victory against the Varath Empire, they were calling it. A triumph of engineering and tactical brilliance. But Mira wasn't thinking about victory. She was thinking about the 3 small, trembling bodies huddled in the supply crate behind her. Stupid, 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 she muttered to herself, running a hand through her sweat-dampened hair. What had she been thinking? Sneaking aboard a destroyed enemy vessel during cleanup operations was bad enough. Smuggling enemy alien life forms back onto a human military station was the kind of offense that earned you a court-martial and a one-way trip to a penal colony. But when she'd found them, wedged between collapsed bulkheads and twisted metal, mewling softly in the darkness, Mira had never been good at walking away. The Varath were apex predators. Everyone in the fleet knew that. Standing nearly 8 feet tall when fully grown, with razor-sharp talons, double rows of serrated teeth, and a pack-hunting instinct that had dominated their homeworld for millions of years. They'd carved through 12 star systems before humanity had even figured out how to mount a proper defense. But these weren't grown Varath warriors. These were cubs, barely the size of terrier dogs, with oversized paws and eyes that still held that universal look of confused helplessness that all young creatures shared. Their dark fur was matted with dust and what Mira hoped wasn't blood. When she'd reached out her hand, instead of snapping at her with those tiny needle teeth, the smallest one, the runt with the distinctive white patch on its chest, had simply pressed its head against her palm and made a sound. Somewhere between a purr and a whimper, she'd named him Karu. She didn't know why. It just felt right. Now sitting in the cargo bay with stolen supplies and 3 illegal aliens, Mira wondered if her compassion had finally crossed the line into outright insanity. "You're going to get me killed," she whispered to the crate. A soft chirp answered her. The emergency lighting cast everything in shades of amber and shadow. Mira had disabled the security cameras in this section, a trick she'd learned from her years as a maintenance tech. But that only bought her time. Eventually someone would notice. Eventually she'd have to explain, or hide them better. She knelt beside the crate, carefully lifting the thermal blanket she'd draped over the top. 3 pairs of eyes gleamed back at her, amber, luminous, and far too intelligent for comfort. The cubs had stopped shaking at least. The portable heater she'd rigged was doing its job, and the emergency rations she'd broken into seemed to be agreeable to their digestive systems. Karu, the smallest, crawled forward immediately. His siblings, larger, more cautious, watched from the back of the crate as he tumbled over the edge and landed directly on Mira's boot with all the grace of a dropped sock. Despite everything, the danger, the impossibility, the sheer recklessness of it all, Mira smiled. "Hey, little guy," she murmured, reaching down to steady him. Karu's claws, still tiny and blunt, scrabbled against the reinforced material of her standard-issue boots as he tried to climb up her leg. When that proved too difficult, he simply curled up on top of her foot, tucking his oversized head beneath one paw. Within seconds, he was asleep. The other 2 cubs watched this display with what Mira could only interpret as sibling skepticism. But hunger and exhaustion were powerful motivators. One by one, they crept forward. First the middle cub with the notched ear, then the largest with the scarred muzzle. They sniffed at Mira's other boot, at her leg, at her outstretched hand, and then, apparently deciding she was acceptable, they settled down as well. One draped across her ankle. The other wedged itself between both boots like a living, breathing doorstop. Mira sat very still, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever fragile trust had been established in this moment. 3 apex predators, infant, yes, but still Varath, still the enemy, sleeping peacefully on the boots of a human cargo tech who should know better. "What am I going to do with you?" she whispered. The question hung in the recycled air, unanswered. Outside, she could hear the distant sounds of the station coming back to life. Crew rotations changing, supply shuttles docking, the victory celebrations that would last for days. Humanity had won a battle. They'd proven they could fight back against the Varath Empire. But as Mira looked down at the 3 sleeping cubs, She thought about a different kind of victory. One that didn't involve missiles and wreckage. One that didn't require enemies and extinction. She thought about the Verath homeworld, somewhere out in the contested zones. She thought about parents who would never see their children again. About nurseries destroyed in orbital bombardments. About the cycle of violence that had brought them all to this point. And she thought about the choice in front of her. The smart choice was obvious. Turn them over to xenobiology. Let the scientists study them. They were valuable specimens after all. Infant Verath had never been captured alive before. The intelligence they could provide, the biological data, the potential for psychological warfare. Karoo shifted in his sleep, making that purring whimper sound again. His tiny chest rose and fell with perfect trust. No, Mira said softly. No, I don't think so. She'd figure something out. She always did. Maybe Dr. Yates in the biolab owed her a favor. Maybe she could forge some transfer documents. Maybe she could smuggle them off station entirely. Find some remote colony world where 3 growing Verath cubs wouldn't raise too many questions. It was insane. It was impossible. It was probably going to end with her in a detention cell, but as Karoo's paw twitched in dreams, and his siblings pressed closer to the warmth of her presence, Mira found she didn't care. Humanity had won a battle today by being better warriors. Maybe they could win the war by being better than that. She settled back against the crate, careful not to disturb her unusual companions, and began planning. The night cycle would last another 6 hours. That gave her time. Not much, but enough. Mira looked down at the 3 predator cubs sleeping on her boots and smiled. All right, you 3, she whispered. Let's see if I can save the galaxy by being completely, utterly stupid. Karoo's ear twitched, but he didn't wake. And in the amber glow of Cargo Bay 7, surrounded by the aftermath of war, a human and 3 Verath cubs shared a moment of perfect, impossible peace.